Welcome to Cut to the Chase, where we talk about compelling legal, regulatory, and public interest information and news. Your host is Greg Goldfarb, an attorney, entrepreneur, investor, and activist.
All right, folks, it's time for our favorite podcast, Cut to the Chase. And you might remember this face and name, Jonathan Lowy from Global Action on Gun Violence, who came onto my show a few weeks ago to tell us what he was doing and his group was doing to try to combat all these gun problems that we're having, not only in the United States, but elsewhere. And one of the things that he mentioned was getting other nations involved and all of that. And since our last podcast, there was a major ruling by the appellate courts involving one of Jonathan's case. Jonathan, how are you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good, good. Congratulations on the, it's a victory, but it's not a victory. So let's go over what happened in the case. You were representing the country of Mexico. Mexico's got all these strict laws that, prohibit criminals from getting guns, yet our gun manufacturers have somehow or another figured out a way around that and are making almost $200 million a year, basically supplying the cartels. And so let it rip. Tell us about the case and what happened recently.
Sure. Well, the government of Mexico, the national government, filed a lawsuit a couple of years ago against a number of the major gun manufacturers, Smith & Wesson being the lead one. We filed it, and I and my organization, Global Action on Gun Violence, represent the government of Mexico. And the allegations are that the manufacturers supply the drug cartels in Mexico by their business practices that facilitate gun trafficking. And let me explain how that happens. Well, in Mexico, there is only one gun store. It's on a military base. They've got tough gun laws where it's extremely difficult for criminals to get guns. So what the cartels do is they get their guns from the United States, and they're able to do that because of the business practices, the choices that gun manufacturers make in how they sell their guns. And that's really specific ways where for over 20 years, manufacturers have been told by the U.S. government, here is how your guns are ending up in the hands of criminals and gangs and criminal organizations. There's a small percentage of gun dealers that are selling virtually all the crime guns. They're selling guns to obvious gun traffickers. They're selling them to obvious straw purchasers. They're engaging in bulk sales of guns. In the case of Mexico, these are often bulk sales of multiple assault weapons and thousands of rounds of ammunition. And Mexico argued, well, that is negligence and considerably worse than negligence. It's actually aiding and abetting illegal gun trafficking, and manufacturers should be held liable for that, and they should be made to stop it and change their business practices. That's what their lawsuit was all about. The trial court initially dismissed the case, holding that it was prohibited by a U.S. federal law that uniquely shields the gun industry, what's called the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, PLACA. And what happened last week, literally a week ago, last Monday, the unanimous three-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit reversed that dismissal. And the court held Mexico can proceed in its case because we come under an exception of PLACA. And that was a huge deal and great news for the government. And also, I should say, great news for the people of the United States, because if Mexico can prevail, the U.S. will be as much or more of a beneficiary than the people and government of Mexico.
All right, I want to get to how that is, but in your lawsuit, you're not necessarily, what exactly are you asking the court to do?
Sure. Well, there are two types of relief that we're seeking. One is damages. Manufacturers should have to pay for they've caused the government and the people of Mexico, which is vast. We're not there yet. It could likely be in the billions of dollars. And we are also asking the court for injunctive relief, that is, for the court to order these companies to sell their guns in a safer, more responsible way, including some things that the US federal government has asked these companies to do for over 20 years. And if they do that, that will greatly reduce the flow of crime guns, both to the cartels in Mexico and to gangs and criminals here in the US.
All right, so our first podcast on this topic, some of my colleagues are, they don't like gun control and they were like scoffing at, and I said, did you even listen to the podcast, or you just saw that it was, hey, let's, attack the gun manufacturers willy-nilly. So I want to I don't want to say dummy it down, but I want them, if they actually have the nerve to listen to the details of this, to really understand what these gun manufacturers are doing. I mean, all right, so they're selling lots of ammunition and lots of guns to dealers in the United States. They're not selling them to directly to the cartel. It's not like knock, knock, knock. Hi, I'm the cartel from Mexico. Please let me buy, 1 trillion rounds of whatever. So you got to break it down to exactly what you're alleging these gun manufacturers are doing that's so problematic.
Sure, I will, but when you talk about people who are quote unquote pro-gun, it might be hostile to this sort of case. They should know that over the years, people in the gun industry have called on manufacturers to do exactly what we're asking. Gun dealers, including someone who used to be the head of the Stocking Gun Dealers Association, was extremely outspoken, saying, manufacturers, you need to clean up your act. And the fact is, most gun dealers in the United States are responsible business people who care deeply about their rights and their responsibilities, to prevent guns from getting into criminal hands. And this gets to what we're asking the manufacturers to do, because ATF, Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, over 20 years ago, issued a report that said about 90% of gun dealers don't sell any crime guns. So that's what I'm talking about. These are the good guys who are doing the right thing. And about 5% of gun dealers sell about 90% of the crime guns. That's the problem. And so what the manufacturers are doing wrong is a few things. One, they're supplying these bad dealers with guns willy-nilly without any safeguards whatsoever. Their manufacturers are told criminals are getting guns through like bulk sales of assault weapons. Often with Mexico, you got people who are coming into gun stores buying 5, 10, 15 or more assault weapons in one purchase, maybe a few hundred or thousands of rounds of ammunition along with it, maybe a 50 caliber sniper rifle or two. These are guns that can shoot a helicopter down and have a range of about a mile. These are really military weapons. And someone who's buying that, it's obvious they're a gun trafficker. And then if they come back to the store a week or two later and they want to fill up their shopping cart with another dozen guns or so, that is a trafficker. And what we see, and we've alleged it in our complaints, you have people who are returning to gun stores multiple times, buying ultimately hundreds of guns, thousands of rounds of ammunition. Dealers are engaging in those sales, knowing full well, or they should know full well, that those guns are headed to criminal hands, and manufacturers should cut off those dealers. They should require all their dealers to have safe sales practices that screen for straw purchasers, that screen for traffickers, that look out for these indicators of trafficking. And when they come in, don't supply them, call law enforcement instead. And you've got about 90% of gun dealers right now, apparently, who are already doing that sort of thing. And these are the ones who really are on our side. They don't want their brand and industry tarnished by the bad apples. But the manufacturers, unfortunately, have not listened to people in their own industry. They haven't listened to the responsible voices among gun dealers and others. They've gone after the money. They want the profits from the criminal market. That's what we want to stop.
All right. So from what I understand, Mexico has the third most gun-related deaths in the world. And you touched on how, all right, so the gun manufacturers selling it to the guns that end up getting to the Mexican cartels. Who cares? How does that affect us? It's tongue in cheek, but you brought that out. You brought that point out that it actually comes back to, cause chaos, I guess, in the United States. How do you know that that's the case? And what actually is what are you saying? What are they doing that's so bad in the United States?
Sure. Well, a few things. I mean, for one, if you're concerned about migration on the southern border with Mexico, then you should be on our side. Because what's driving the migration from Mexico into the US is largely violence. And that's violence that uses US guns. It's our guns, exactly the sales practices we're talking about. That's arming the cartels, that's arming other criminals. And if you didn't have that violence, if you didn't have that flood of guns, you would have much, much less of a migration problem. If you're concerned about the fentanyl crisis in the United States, which is a massive crisis that the cartels in Mexico are major players in, then you should be on our side, because the reason that the cartels are able to engage in their awful criminal enterprises, including their fentanyl trafficking, is because of those guns that they're getting from the US because of the business practices of the gun companies. If they didn't have that arsenal, they could and would be put down. The fact is, they have arsenals that can outgun many of the state and local police in Mexico. And even the Mexican military gets in battles with these cartels. And I mentioned that the 50 caliber sniper rifle, cartels have used that gun, which comes from the US, to shoot down a Mexican military helicopter that's trying to apprehend and stop the cartels. This is a level of criminal enterprise that we simply don't have in the United States. And again, 70 to 90% of their guns are coming from the US.
All right. Now I want to clear up a couple things. You said that Mexico hired you, your group, a couple of other lawyers. I don't want to overlook the other lawyers that are helping out here. Steve Shadowin, Richard Brunel, Nicholas Shadowin. So is it like one person from Mexico that's like anti-guns and saying, hey, I'm representing Mexico? Or is it actually the country of Mexico? I mean, like, how high up on the food chain in the Mexican government are you dealing with?
I mean, it's the federal government. I mean, it'd be as if the US government were filing suit, but it's the Mexican government that's filing suit. So this was brought with a foreign ministry, which is essentially like the State Department, being in the lead of the action, but an action that was blessed at the highest level of the Mexican government from the presidency. And I will say, it's not about hating guns or anything like that. I mean, this is hating criminal gun violence. That's what it's, hating, was the mindset of the Mexican government. They've made clear this is not attack on the Second Amendment. It's not an attack on U.S. views about guns. It's an attack on arming criminal elements, particularly the cartels with guns. And that's something that I think most law-abiding gun owners and most law-abiding gun dealers would fully support.
Yeah. So how many guns are getting smuggled into Mexico per year? How many crime guns? Do you have any idea?
Well, they're all crime guns. I mean, all the guns that are because they're being illegally trafficked. We're not talking about lawful exports, and the numbers are in the hundreds of thousands. In the 250 thousand is very much low end of the estimate. Yeah, certainly it could well be considerably over double that to
All right.
500,000 or so.
Wow, that's amazing. And that's per year. So, I mean, that's an amazing amount of
That's
guns.
per year, and also what studies have shown was a pretty direct correlation to when the United States Congress let the assault weapon ban lapse in 2004. When that happened, you saw this huge spike in gun violence in Mexico, and that's where the huge flood of assault weapons began across the border.
All right, I want to shift briefly to the law. So we already went over this. The gun manufacturers somehow or another, got Congress to pass this immunity PLACA, Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, that there's no industry that has that kind of immunity, but somehow or another they were able to get that through. And to me, I guess that's falls under the where there's smoke, where there's smoke, there's fire. Why were they even asking for immunity in the first place if they knew they were up to no good? But I'll leave that for the side. And I'm not a scholar on that, and I know that there's there was exceptions, but nobody ever is able to somehow or another fall under that exception. And is that or exemptions? Is that what the legal issue at play here was, whether Mexico falls in their case falls under any of these exemptions?
Yeah, well, that's the issue. There are a number of issues before the court. That was the issue that the court relied on to rule in favor. What the court held was that Mexico's case comes within what is called the predicate exception, which essentially says, and it's in this federal consumer protection law, and it says essentially that if a gun company knowingly violates a law applicable to the sale and marketing of firearms, and that causes the harm that's being complained of, they don't get protected. So, essentially, gun company breaks the law, they don't get protected. This is called the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. It's not called the Protection of Unlawful Commerce and Arms Act. If you're engaging in unlawful commerce and arms, you're treated like anyone else. And we allege, and we look forward to proving, that these manufacturers' conduct that I've described is a violation of law. It's aiding and abetting of gun trafficking. So it's on that grounds that the First Circuit held that the case could go forward.
All right, so now where are we? The First Circuit, it's not like, hey, yippee, pop the champagne, we won. less guns, less crime guns are going into Mexico, less fentanyl is going to come in United States and all that kind of stuff. So what posture is the litigation? Is there going to be a further appeal? Do you not know that? Or are you like, all right, now I get to take depositions and get all this information from the gun manufacturers?
Well, yeah, we don't know what the next step of the defendants will be. And they've got some time to decide. Actually, the trial judge did schedule a sort of status conference for early February in a couple weeks. So we'll see what happens there, and maybe we'll get a better sense of what the defendants will do. I mean, I'm confident, you never know, but I'm confident that this case will get back into the trial court, fairly soon. We can proceed into the discovery.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you get back to work because I know you're a busy guy. I thank you for coming on short notice, but I was very excited about the victory. I wanted to have, sort of a timely podcast on the whole breaking news kind of thing. So Jonathan Lowy from Global Action on Gun Violence, go do your thing. All right. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. And check out our website, if I can make a shameless plug, actiononguns.org. And you can learn more about our work and hopefully join us, get on our email list, and you can stay up to date.
All right. And we'll put all this information on our show notes so you can get involved, because as we talked about in our last episode, there are ways for you to get involved, donating and all that kind of stuff. So check out the show notes and go and dive in. It's a big problem, and, all hands on board, basically. Jonathan, have a good day. All right.
Right. Same with you, Greg. Thanks.
That's all for this episode of Cut to the Chase. But before you go, will you open up your podcast app and give us a 5-star review? You can also leave a comment about what you liked most or other topics you'd like us to cover. And please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming shows. Thanks, everybody. Be safe out there.